Ian Richard Kyle Paisley had the most extraordinary career in Northern Ireland politics.
And we are going to keep the thoroughfares open for our Protestant faith and our Protestant heritage.
From militant preacher and street protester
No surrender!
to occupying the highest political office in the land.
Never! Never! Never!
From raucous outsider to genial partner in government, his was a life lived in the public eye. I have known the Paisleys for over 3 decades. Last year, Ian Paisley agreed to talk to me at length about his role in Northern Ireland's tempestuous and more tranquil years. These conversations reveal dramatic and dark secrets of the Democratic Unionist Party.
The scriptures tell us that so-called friends are probably secret enemies.
They will force his obituary writers to reassess his place in history.
The whole system was wrong. It wasn't one man, one vote. I mean, that's no way to run any country.
These programmes will challenge many of his actions over the years.
Is that acceptable, though? Is that good enough just to talk about difficulties? If people...
It's all right for you to sit there and me to sit here in comfort at this time and say that. These were serious days.
They will unmask the hidden world of the Free Presbyterian Church and disclose how Ian Paisley's tenure as moderator ended.
If that means that I should be kicked in the gutter, then kick me in the gutter. If that means that I should be chased out of the church and that I should be rejected as a reject, well, I have to bear that. That's part of the cross.
The programmes will explain why, after years dedicated to smashing Sinn Féin, Ian Paisley ultimately did a deal with Republicans.
If we had turned back, God help this country and what it would have come to.
How do you define yourself? Are you British? Are you an Ulsterman? Are you Irish? Or are you a combination of all of these?
Well, I describe myself as a child of God, first of all. I think that many of these things overlap in a man's life. I know quite a number of Roman Catholic people who are very strongly unionist. I know other Protestant people who perhaps would say we should leave Britain and have a united Ireland. I think that there have been changes because of the make-up of people.
Could you stop there?
Yes.
I'm not asking about other people. I'm asking about you, Ian Paisley. How would you define yourself?
I don't need to define myself. I'm already known.
Yeah, but,
And
okay.
the people who put a label on me, it could be a false label or
But would you ever consider yourself, in any sense, Irish?
Oh, I'm not ashamed to be called an Irishman. I'm not. And I was down recently in Dublin and was entertained by the president and taken in and treated like a buddy.
There was a time, sir, wouldn't that have been described as taking the soup?
Well, it could be, but if the soup was good, why not? I'd take it. As a Ballymena man, if you get it for nothing, that's bonus.
Ian Paisley was born in 1926 in uncertain times, just 5 years after Ireland was partitioned and governments established in Belfast and Dublin. His father, James, a Baptist minister in Armagh City, had been a member of Edward Carson's Ulster Volunteer Force, opposed to independence for Ireland. The political environment in the early 1920s was still volatile, as Ian Paisley's father was to find out.
He was a very jolly, very happy man, and he had a little Austin 6 car, which was quite a car, and he went round the country visiting and preaching. And after my birth, he was out visiting one night, and he ran into 50 men all armed on the roadside, and they pulled him out of his thing and put him against the wall and were going to shoot him. They were gunmen who wanted a united Ireland and thought that my father was a danger to that.
Would they have known him?
Oh, he was well known. My father was very well known. And then a man came in and he said, how dare you touch this man? His wife has just had their second child, and it would be very unlucky to us if we did this. So they had a conference and they decided to let him go if he never would mention what he had seen. So the reason he got away was me, because I had been born.
So you were the little miracle that arrived and saved his life.
That's right. Amazing.
At the age of 2, Ian Paisley's family moved from Armagh to Ballymena, where his father was appointed minister to Hill Street Baptist Church. It was his Scottish-born mother Isabella, however, who was responsible for his evangelical conversion.
I was converted at a meeting that my mother was conducting among children. She was speaking on the Good Shepherd giveth his life for the sheep. And I was touched greatly at that time, although I was only 6 years of age. And at the end of the meeting, I said to my mother, I wouldn't like to be a lost sheep. I'd rather be a saved lamb. And she said, let's go down into the church. So we went down into the church, and it was at that seat that my mother got me to kneel and appointed me to Christ.
What about holidays? Did you go on holidays?
Oh, yes, we always went on holidays.
Where did you go?
The place we went was Cologne, outside Warmpoint.
Did you ever journey southwards? Did you ever go down to Carlingford or places like that?
Oh, yes, I went to Carlingford.
Did you naturally come in contact with local Catholics there, if you were down on holidays and that?
I did,
And did you mingle easily?
Oh, yes. We played together, we did, and they went with me and the boys on the 12th of July to Warmpoint, and then we all went on August Day with them to their place.
So did you march with the Hibernians for the crack?
No, I never let me in. They didn't let me in.
After leaving school, the 16-year-old Ian Paisley went to work on the farm of a family friend, George Watson, in County Tyrone.
I learned to plough, I learned to sow, I learned the running of a farm. The Bible entered my mind very much when I was there. And I remember one day out in the field, I stopped the ploughing and I got down on my knees. And I told the Lord that I was willing to go where He wanted me to go, to say what He wanted me to say, and to be a preacher of the gospel. And I then said to the man I was living with, I said, next Sunday I want to say a word at the church or the mission hall, which I did. And I thought I could give a long sermon. It lasted for 3 minutes. So it was a disaster. It was a very humbling thing for me.
Ian Paisley then moved to a school of evangelism in Wales to study theology. He quickly started to make a name for himself as a preacher before returning to Belfast to complete his studies. His first ministry was at Ravenhill Evangelical Mission Church in East Belfast. There he started organising revival missions and was soon attracting large crowds wherever he went.
How did you end up being invited to preach in Crossgar?
Well, the committee of the Crossgar Mission Hall went to Ballymena during the great missions I had there. And they were absolutely thrilled. And they then met me and said, could you not come and do the same in Crossgar?
Though this invitation came from a small mission hall, it was to have far-reaching consequences for the local Presbyterian church.
The mission hall was too small, so they decided to ask the church for the use of the church hall. But then the Kirk session of the church, which is the ruling body, decided they were going to have this mission. And then suddenly the presbytery stepped in above their heads and closed the door of the church. And I mean, it was something that should not have been done.
This in turn led to a split from which emerged Ian Paisley's Free Presbyterian Church. Congregations sprang up across Northern Ireland throughout the 1950s. These new churches were started by people attracted to Ian Paisley's fundamentalist message.
At a great cost, over 400 years ago, the martyrs and reformers and confessors broke the shackles of popish superstition and priestcraft and recovered the gospel in what is known in history as the Great Reformation. I am a Reformation Protestant.
Nobody escaped your wrath.
Nobody.
In 1959, you spoke of the Queen Mother and Princess Margaret in the following words when they had an audience with the Pope.
Yes.
You accused them of committing spiritual fornication and adultery with the Antichrist. Wasn't that extraordinary?
No,
in tone?
that was the language of Luther. That was the language of Calvin. That was the language of Protestantism. And I have no apology to make for being a Protestant.
Ian Paisley's attacks on the Catholic Church were becoming ever more confrontational.
The mouthpiece for these accusations, Northern Ireland's militant Protestant leader, the Reverend Ian Paisley. Denounced in turn as Adolf Paisley by Catholic opponents, he was the focal point of the demonstration.
In 1962, he even took his protests against Catholicism to the Vatican.
I mean, they were trying to sell the thing that the Reformation was a mistake, that there's no Reformation Protestants now. There's no men that believe the Bible only the religion of Protestants. And they were very active, and the time had come for a stand to be taken.
Come 1963, Pope John the 23rd dies.
Yes.
You're reported as having said, "The Romish man of sin is now in hell." How could you stand over that remark?
Well, I don't know whether I said that or not.
Do you think I'm making that up?
No, I think that people make up things and put them into my mouth. And
would that be your sentiment, though? Would
What?
that be the way you would think at that point in time
What?
about the death of the Pope? The Romish man of sin is in hell. Is that how you would have thought at that stage?
No, I think that anybody who is not saved by the grace of God will be lost in hell forever.
The spirit of Edward Carson, the father figure of unionism, ran in the veins of Ian Paisley in his opposition to Dublin's involvement in the affairs of Northern Ireland.
As the Ulster where the Loyalists shall walk, they shall walk without hindrance.
More and more, he was identifying with individuals in the tradition of Carson.
This battle to every end of this province.
Foremost among these was a former policeman turned firebrand politician, District Inspector John William Nixon.
Why was D.I. Nixon, a former police officer, a dissident unionist in many ways,
Yes.
MP, why was Nixon so important in your life?
Well, he was important in my life because he was the impersonation of the battle and what it really was about in Northern Ireland. And of course that was a stand taken against those that would take away our flag take away our position in the Union.
But how prudent was it for you as an emerging young politician, clergyman, to be identified with a man against whom the allegations have been made that he had been involved in murder? Was it wise for somebody like you to be identified with?
Well, I liked a man that was prepared to stand up for what he believed in, and everything was said about you in those days if you interfered with the official unionist people. They felt that they would just snub you out. But some people were not going to be snubbed out.
From now on, Ian Paisley was regularly involved in one street protest or another against any expression of Irish nationalism. The tricolour was regularly flown in places like West Belfast. Ian Paisley protested against the presence of a green, white and gold flag in the window of the Divis Street headquarters of the Republican Party and demanded that it be taken down. Rioting broke out and lasted for 2 nights when the government capitulated and ordered the police to remove the flag.
You knew the geography of this city better than anybody else.
Yes.
You walked the streets, you knew the people. Was it prudent of you to go into Divis Street in 1964 to remove a flag from the Republican office there? Surely that was a pretty provocative thing to do.
Well, I didn't remove anything.
But you led the protest which urged that the flag be removed. You can't exonerate yourself.
Well, it was my attitude, and I believe I was right in what I did.
Despite the fact that you triggered a riot 2 nights in a row and that people got injured, was that prudent behaviour?
The riot was rioting. The people who rioted are the people that have to pay for that, not me.
Ian Paisley's line of attack was now twofold: the defence of Protestantism and bolting the door on Dublin. An invitation to Stormont in 1967 by Northern Ireland's Prime Minister Terence O'Neill to his Irish counterpart Taoiseach Jack Lynch provided another opportunity for Ian Paisley to protest.
Was it not the convention of the time that neighbourly prime ministers would be invited from country to country? Was that not the? Was that
no,
not
there was a
normal?
time, you know perfectly well, there was a time that no unionists would have been invited to Dublin, and no Shinners or others would have been invited from Dublin to here.
In opposing what Ian Paisley saw as the Protestant Church's embrace of ecumenism, the mainstream Presbyterians' annual General Assembly at Church House became a regular target. In 1966, Ian Paisley led a march to the Assembly through the predominantly nationalist area of Cormac Street, with almost predictable consequences.
Why, Mr. Paisley, did you feel compelled to protest against the meeting of the General Assembly in 1966?
Because I always had a protest. Well, I always had a protest.
Why?
Because that was part of our exposure of what was happening in the Assembly.
What was worrying you about their behaviour at that point in time, though?
Well, there was certainly a very strong ecumenical movement abroad in the church in those days.
But did you not know that there was always the potential, the danger for trouble when you engaged in these street protests?
If you're trying to justify today what was done at Cormac Street, you need to go and talk to the people who were responsible for that, not to me.
Also in 1966, Ian Paisley launched his own newspaper, the Protestant Telegraph, to spread his political and religious message. His firebrand oratory in attacking the Catholic Church was uncompromising.
And we are going to keep the thoroughfares open for our Protestant faith and our Protestant heritage.
Mr. Paisley, you reported after a rally as saying the following. Catholic homes caught fire because they were loaded with petrol bombs. Catholic churches were attacked and burned because there were arsenals, and priests handed out submachine guns to parishioners. Mm-hmm. Did you say that? Did you believe that?
I have no memory of saying that, but it was true that there were guns in the churches, and it was true that there was men in the Roman Catholic churches who used the churches as a safe place to hide.
But were you directly implicating priests in concealing guns in churches and giving cover to IRA men in churches?
I said what I said. I have nothing to add to it.
You also said that the massive discrimination in employment and allocation of public housing for Catholics existed because they breed like rabbits and multiply like vermin. Mm. Would you stand over that today?
I have no record of that, and that's what I said.
Do you think you might have said it?
No, I don't think I would have said it.
You were reported as having said
well, I mean, they would have reported it, I think.
Addressing a crowd at Loughgall in County Armagh,
yes,
you are reported as having said the following: I am anti-Roman Catholic, but God being my judge, I love the poor dupes who are ground down under that system.
Yes, so I do. And I love them, and I want to bring them to a place of freedom in the gospel, the same way as I love the Protestants.
And you're not walking away from that statement?
Well, if I said it, I have no apology to make for saying it. But I don't know where you get these quotes from. Some of them are...
You're well reported, sir.
They're well reported and over-reported.
The Provisional IRA is the military wing of the Roman Catholic Church, you said at one stage. Did you genuinely believe that?
Well, that's true. That stands true in history. They have been the people that the Church of Rome used to forward their interests, yes.
I want to give you another little colourful quote.
Yes.
The dog will return to its vomit. The washed sow will return to its wallowing in the mire. But by God's grace, we will never return to popery. Again, no pope here, 1982.
That's right, yes.
Wasn't that very colourful?
Yes, very colourful, very, very right. You don't expect me to go to Rome, do you? Are you trying to convert me?
In the mid-1960s, a student-led protest began in Northern Ireland with Queen's University as its hub. This campaign was influenced by the civil rights movement in America, which was demanding equal rights for black people. Here, the demands were for equal voting rights for Catholics, equal job opportunities, and the fair allocation of housing. This civil rights movement was Ian Paisley's next target. A counter-demonstration organised by Ian Paisley against the Civil Rights March in Armagh City in November 1968 resulted in serious rioting.
Everything has been done by the police to hinder the rightful assembly of Protestants in this town today, and yet the roads have been left open for the civil rights movement.
Less than 2 weeks later, amidst the worsening situation, the modernising Prime Minister, Terence O'Neill, went on television and pledged change and reform, but did not concede one man, one vote, a fundamental demand of the civil rights movement.
Ulster stands at the crossroads. I believe you know me well enough by now to appreciate that I am not a man given to extravagant language. The bully boy tactics we saw in Armagh are no answer to these grave problems, but they incur for us the contempt of Britain and the world.
To this day, unionist politicians rarely admit to discrimination against Catholics or that the regime of the time rigged and gerrymandered electoral boundaries to its advantage. Places like Derry and Fermanagh, where there were nationalist majorities, the council was still controlled by unionists numerically. Was that fair?
No, it wasn't fair. Fair government is that every man has the same power to vote for what he wants.
In Dungannon in 1963, there were over 300 families on the waiting list for a house, and no Catholic had been allocated a permanent house for 34 years. How unacceptable was that?
It wasn't acceptable at all. So it wasn't.
Was that British justice?
No, it wasn't justice at all. And those that put their hands to that have to carry some of the blunt and blame for what has happened in our country.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I simply what I mean. I mean that if you vote down democracy, you're responsible for bringing in anarchy. And they brought in anarchy, and they set family against family and friend against friend.
In Derry's Guildhall in 1967, Unionists held 60% of the seats, yet Unionism had only 32% of the vote.
Yes.
Did you think that was fair?
No, there should be, but that's the way it was. The whole system was wrong. It wasn't one man, one vote. I mean, that's no way to run any country. There should be absolute freedom and there should be absolute liberty.
What might be baffling and puzzling, Mr. Paisley, to many people listening to what you have just said is why you were so determined to oppose the demand for one man, one vote, as advocated by people like John Hume and Austin Currie at that point in time.
Because the civil rights movement was a movement that actually was a United Ireland movement.
How can you say that?
Well, that's what they were doing. They were associating themselves with a battle that the ordinary, decent, law-abiding Protestant could not associate themselves.
How can you say that? Weren't John Hume and Austin Currie and people like them simply asking for British civil rights, the rights to vote? What was wrong with that? Those were British rights. How can you say that they were associating with the United Ireland or the United Islanders if they were simply asking for British civil rights, the right to vote?
Because the civil rights movement was tied up with threats and was tied up with other things. It wasn't only in that.
Did you see it as a front for a United Ireland then?
Yes, it was part of the overall cauldron that was burning and was being heated by various sections of the community to get their own way.
The frequency of civil rights marches in various towns and cities throughout Northern Ireland in pursuit of reform culminated in the Battle of the Bogside in Derry City in August 1969. Faced with a beleaguered Royal Ulster Constabulary, the British government sent troops onto the streets for only the second time since the inception of the state.
Terence O'Neill is a dictator on a Lundy. No surrender!
Ian Paisley was relentless in his verbal attacks on Terence O'Neill, portraying him as feeble. His support was growing in a restless unionist community. His popularity was further enhanced in the wake of 2 spells in jail arising from his street agitation. In 1969, Terence O'Neill resigned as Prime Minister. The following year, Ian Paisley replaced him as the Stormont MP for Bandside, and months later he won the Westminster seat for North Antrim.
Ian Richard Kyle Paisley, 7,981.
In 1971, Ian Paisley formed his own political party, the Democratic Unionist Party, along with Desmond Bowl, a barrister and Unionist MP, who had been one of Terence O'Neill's harshest critics. This was the start of a very long friendship. These were turbulent days in Northern Ireland. Bloody Sunday was a watershed. What was your reaction when you heard about 13 people having been shot dead on the streets of Derry on the 30th of January 1972?
Oh, I was very angry that that's what it had come to. I felt it was a very dangerous thing, and then an attempt to cover it for what it was not. I mean, the inquiry afterwards proved that some of these people, they had neither weapons nor were they using weapons. They were just making a protest within the law.
Were you a bit embarrassed, though, when David Cameron ultimately, 35 years later, apologised and said in Parliament that the killings were unjustified and wrong?
Well, I wasn't embarrassed. I was glad to hear him for the first time as a British leader telling the truth about it, saying what really did happen.
Worried by the escalating violence and exasperated by the pace of political reform, London suspended the Northern Ireland government and took control of security, introducing direct rule for the first time. A conference of the British and Irish governments and local parties, but not the DUP, met at Sunningdale in England to work out how political power could be restored. Agreement was reached to set up a power-sharing executive giving nationalists cabinet positions for the first time. This accord also aimed at giving the Irish government an ongoing input into the affairs of Northern Ireland. The creation of this new administration in 1974, headed by Ulster Unionist Party leader Brian Faulkner, triggered another crisis. What was so wrong with the idea of the SDLP and the Alliance Party and members and representatives of the Catholic nationalist community being in government, being part of an administration ruling Northern Ireland? What was wrong with that?
The people of Northern Ireland made that choice. That would be fine with me, but they didn't make that choice. This was something being forced on us.
What do you say to your critics, though, and the critics of that time, who would argue that the opposition to a Council of Ireland, to any involvement of Dublin in the affairs of Northern Ireland at that stage, was a smokescreen to stop Catholics having any power in the government of Northern Ireland?
I don't accept that at all, in the sense that you are saying, they're saying that they wanted to destroy Northern Ireland, and the people in Westminster were in it up over their heads. They wanted rid of us too. So
Dr. Fitzgerald and the
Ian Paisley's tone was growing increasingly belligerent.
You shall not rule over us. We are saying no surrender.
A loose coalition of dissident unionist politicians, Protestant workers and loyalist paramilitaries, including the militant Ulster Defence Association, came together, intent on destroying the new power-sharing administration. Their action became known as the Ulster Workers' Council strike. Ian Paisley played a central role. How did you feel, though, about sitting down with Andy Turry, the leader of the Ulster Defence Association, given that his people were on the streets, involved in wholesale intimidation, forcing people to close down their businesses, stopping people from going to work and going about their daily duties? As a citizen, as a Democrat, sir, how did you feel?
I was sitting at a table not to talk to people like that. And the situation was just simply this. We had to get this thing finished with. And I certainly believed that there was a merit. There was a merit in having a council strike.
And did you not feel that this was a violation of democracy, though, from your perspective? If people were taking the law into their own hands, weren't you essentially challenging the very essence of rule of law?
No, I was not. I was not.
So are you saying then that the people who were masked on the street, who were blocking roads, who were seizing cars, who were smashing up cars, are you saying that they were perfectly okay?
You're putting out a broad thing, and you're saying everybody that took part in this was a lawless person and were prepared to break the law. That's not so. And they didn't break the law. The country went on. The country went on. Its businesses went on. Its democracy went on.
But it was not business as usual. 60% of businesses ended up paralysed, with the power station workers bringing life close to a standstill. Worse was to follow. Loyalist paramilitaries now switched their focus to the Republic of Ireland, killing 33 people in 2 attacks.
On May 17, 1974, bombs went off in Dublin and in Monaghan during the Ulster workers' strike. Just how much of a shock was that to your system?
Well, I was shocked, very much shocked that there was anyone going to be hurt in that way. But I mean, who brought that on themselves was the people that their own political leaders, whom they had endorsed in what their attitude to Northern Ireland. And at that time, the attitude of the Southern government in Northern Ireland was ridiculous.
Are you saying in any sense that the bombing of Dublin and Monaghan was justified because of the political action of the Irish government supporting a Council of Ireland?
I don't believe in killing and never have.
Let me ask you though, when those bombings took place in Dublin, blamed on the Ulster Volunteer Force, did you consider walking away from the UWC strike at that point in time?
I had nothing to do with that.
I accept that.
I not only had nothing to do with it, but I said I had nothing to do with it and denounced the people who had done it.
I accept that.
What more could I do?
Surely you connected those bombs being exploded in Dublin with what was going on in the streets of Northern Ireland. What I'm asking you is, did you consider walking away from this strike in the interest of maybe stopping other killings?
I took my stand. I denounced what was wrong, but I could not say to the people, just sit down and let them put a rope around your neck.
11 days later, the Faulkner-led power-sharing executive collapsed. Ian Paisley and the Ulster Workers' Council had achieved their goal.
If you're not prepared to govern Northern Ireland like any other part of the United Kingdom, then let the Ulster people do the job for themselves.
The IRA, meanwhile, stepped up its campaign at home and in Britain. With direct rule restored, Northern Ireland lurched from crisis to crisis and from atrocity to atrocity, with the rival paramilitary organisations bombing and shooting. In London, Ian Paisley was increasingly seen as part of the problem.
There are those who would have charged that you kept stirring the pot. Jim Callaghan accused you of using the language of war cast in a biblical mould. Edward Heath called you a demagogue and a wrecker, while Roy Mason remembered you as an oafish bully and a poisonous bigot. What do you say to those allegations?
Just laughed at them. They did a lot for Northern Ireland. They did a lot for Northern Ireland. And of course, when I read that stuff now, and you read it to me, I really have a chuckle, because I certainly didn't think I was doing so well.
Ian Paisley led a second strike in 1977, demanding tougher action against the IRA and a return to unionist majority rule at Stormont.
You said the great decisions were taken by elected leaders, but yet there were hundreds of UDA men on the street. They weren't elected by anyone. They were affiliated with people who were killing. They were affiliated with people who were lying in jail, convicted of murder. Where did that sit with you as a Democrat? Were you uncomfortable? Did it ever occur to you that you wished you hadn't been affiliated or associated with those people?
The people that we were working with, the majority of them were men with clean hands and right spirits. And of course, in any situation like this, you would have a degree of difficulties. And we had our difficulties, but I think that we come out of them well.
But is that acceptable, though? Is that good enough
Well,
just to talk about difficulties?
Well,
if people...
it's all right for you to sit there and me to sit here in comfort at this time and say that. These were serious days. We have the King's Mill massacre. We have all of these things coming in. Surely the time had come when people had to take the risk of their own lives. So all I'm saying, I take my hat off to the people of Northern Ireland who stood and stood well in a very difficult time.
But this time, the strike did not attract widespread support. Despite a pledge to quit public life if it failed, the DUP leader continued his agitation. The arrival of a new Conservative government in May 1979, headed by Margaret Thatcher, encouraged unionists to expect a tougher anti-IRA stance.
Where there is discord, may we bring harmony. Where there is error, may we bring truth. Where there is doubt, may we bring faith. And where there is despair, may we bring hope.
Only 2 months earlier, her close advisor and hardline Northern Ireland spokesman, Eirene Neve, had been murdered by Republicans.
Did you believe that she would be a good friend to Northern Ireland?
Yes, I thought she would be a good friend in Northern Ireland, but I was sadly disappointed.
On a single day in the first months of Mrs. Thatcher's premiership, the IRA killed the Queen's cousin Earl Mountbatten and some members of his family at Mullaghmore in the Republic, and 18 soldiers at Narrow Water near Warren Point, County Down. But this mounting violence failed to cool Anglo-Irish relations. In 1980, the Prime Minister flew into Dublin to be embraced by the controversial Taoiseach Charles J. Haughey. Out of that historic meeting emerged an agreement to conduct joint studies on areas of common interest. This became known as the totality of relationships, a development which was anathema to Ian Paisley.
How much of a betrayal did you feel that was by Mrs. Thatcher when she went to Dublin, embraced Charles J. Haughey and engaged in this arrangement?
Well, I think that it really stirred people that here we have the Prime Minister going around and having this sort of love-in with the South. I don't think that she should be negotiating with Dublin at all on the future of this part of the United Kingdom.
This hardened the DUP leader's resolve. He embarked on a series of actions in the style of his role model Edward Carson, the Unionist leader who had led the resistance to Irish independence at the start of the 20th century. The first of these was a rally of 500 men, the so-called Paisley's Army, at night on a County Antrim hillside. They didn't carry guns but waved firearm certificates to demonstrate their access to weapons.
This is only a small token of many thousands of men who are pledged to me, and I am pledged to them, to stand together at this time of grave trouble in Northern Ireland.
What message were you hoping to send out to the outer world, given the presence of those men brandishing those gun licenses?
And that Ulster will fight and Ulster will be right, and there will be no surrender.
Who came up with that idea to form Paisley's Army on the side of that mountain? Whose idea was that?
It was my idea, and it was a warning to Mrs. Thatcher and to the powers that be in Westminster, and it was a warning also to the nationalist people of Northern Ireland and the whole of Ireland that there were people who would not be run and bargained over, and their future bargained over by Mrs. Thatcher or anyone else.
Throughout 1981, Northern Ireland woke up to reports of huge Carson Trail rallies and quasi-paramilitary gatherings of the self-styled Third Force. Ian Paisley was mobilising to thwart the IRA. As this was happening, Republicans in the Maze jail embarked on a series of hunger strikes, demanding to be treated as political prisoners. The death of Bobby Sands, followed by 9 others, led to an upsurge in electoral support for Sinn Féin.
If an IRA man comes to a Protestant home and my men are there, they will kill that IRA man. Yes, sir.
And what if they found themselves in conflict with the British security forces?
Well, if the British security forces are going to join up with the IRA to kill Protestants, then we will be in conflict with them.
How dangerous a statement was that, coming from you as a political leader?
It was a statement that needed to be made. I mean, this was a matter of life or death.
Despite Ian Paisley's protests, Dublin's growing involvement in the affairs of Northern Ireland continued. It culminated in the then Taoiseach, Dr. Garret Fitzgerald, and Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher signing the Anglo-Irish Agreement at Hillsborough Castle in 1985. This gave Dublin a consultative role in political and security matters in Northern Ireland.
Did Mrs. Thatcher betray you when she afforded Dublin a foothold in the affairs of Northern Ireland through the Anglo-Irish Agreement signed in November 1985? Do you think she betrayed you?
Yes, it was a surrender document. And even very mild unionists would admit that. I mean, it did unite the unionist people. And I mean, for the first time, I could sit in company with Ulster unionists who saw the same way as I was seeing.
In the aftermath of the signing of the Anglo-Irish Agreement, the DUP leader raged against the Thatcher government. The Iron Lady was now public enemy number 1. Ian Paisley and a broad section of unionism held a mass rally at Belfast City Hall.
Where do the terrorists return to for sanctuary? To the Irish Republic. And yet Mrs. Thatcher tells us that that republic must have some say in our province. We say never, 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 never.
Was that a spur of the moment remark, that never, never, never remark you made?
It was a spur of the moment because in situations like that, I allow my heart to guide me. And the fact that you are bringing this today shows it rung a bell.
You further added, this is a war, and let no one mince words about it. People have already been hurt, people will be hurt, and sacrifices will have to be made. We're going to marshal and organise and mobilise the forces of those who are opposed to this Anglo-Irish Agreement. The government will have to learn that they cannot force down the throats of the Protestant people this abominable agreement. Wasn't that a challenge to the state?
Yes, it was a challenge, and we have won.
But wasn't that very incendiary language to be
Well,
using?
it needed to be. This was no joke. This wasn't a display of men who just wanted to clear their throats. Every man that went out was prepared to give their life.
While Ian Paisley was in America in August the following year, he learned that his Democratic Unionist Party deputy, Peter Robinson, was grabbing the headlines. He had marched with several hundred supporters across the border into the village of Clontibret in County Monaghan in the early hours of the morning. Peter Robinson wanted to demonstrate the alleged absence of border security. The episode was to create tensions between the DUP leader and his deputy.
I will continue to protest against the lack of security, particularly along the border with the Republic of Ireland.
A member of your family said to me that you considered Peter Robinson a silly ass for doing what he did. Did you think he was a silly ass to do what he did?
Well, I don't think that I used that expression, but it should not have been done.
There was a feeling within your family, some members of your family, that he might have been making a bid for the leadership at that point in time.
Everybody has a right to decide for themselves what their answer to that is. I think he thought there was going to be a tremendous uprising as a result of all that. That didn't happen.
Did you suspect that Peter Robinson might shift or move to the Ulster Unionist Party at that point in time when he stepped down as your deputy leader?
No, because the Ulster Unionists didn't like him. So didn't like him.
Peter Robinson disputes Mr. Paisley's account of the origins of the protest, saying it had been a recollection failure and that Ian Paisley himself had agreed to go to Clontibbert.
He ended up paying a fine of £17,500. How damaging was that to your party at that point in time? The fact that people in the street in his own community referred to him as Peter the Punt.
That's the thing that he has to bear. I mean, he did it, and he must take account for it. And it's so unimportant, you know, in the light of what was happening. It was only like a fella scratching a match, and the match burns out, and that's when he throws it away.
Neither the Anglo-Irish Agreement nor the Loyalist protests succeeded in curbing IRA violence in Northern Ireland or Britain. The bombing of a Remembrance Day service in Enniskillen was the most notorious of many atrocities in this period. Nevertheless, the government was prepared to embark on secret talks with the IRA. But this did not stop the IRA taking its campaign to the heart of government. The cabinet itself had a narrow escape when Downing Street was attacked with mortar bombs.
I think it was a crowner for the IRA. They did well out of it, so that they could go right in and do that. I thought it should have put more of a strength into the muscle of the cabinet to go out and deal with the IRA the way they should have been dealt with.
But the British government steadfastly kept the lines of communication open to the Republican leadership. Eventually, this led to the IRA's ceasefire in the summer of 1994.
Jim Molyneux, the leader of the Ulster Unionist Party at that point in time, said of the IRA's ceasefire, "It was the worst thing that ever happened to us." Did you share that view at that time?
Yes, certainly.
Why did no unionists see any merit in that IRA ceasefire announcement at that time?
Well, I think that the people had been so let down that they had no trust in the British government getting us a proper road to getting out of the killings and getting out of the agitations made to try and destroy what our forefathers had fought for and died for.
Meanwhile, a roadmap to peace had been identified, and Ian Paisley would be asked to swallow even tougher medicine. With the full-blown intervention of London, Dublin and Washington in the affairs of Northern Ireland, protracted talks chaired by US Senator George Mitchell resulted in the signing of the Good Friday Agreement in 1998.
I'm pleased to announce that the two governments and the political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement.
Ian Paisley's great political rival, David Trimble, the leader of the Ulster Unionist Party, agreed a deal giving Republicans seats in government and guaranteeing that all paramilitary prisoners would be set free within 2 years. As the final touches were being put to the agreement, Ian Paisley and members of his party brought their opposition to the heart of the talks at Stormont.
Let me say to you tonight.
Not one of you can give out a number.
Let
you
me
pull yourselves out of it.
Ian, where are you taking us? Ian, where are you going to take us?
The crowd don't took New York, Mark 1 and Mark 2.
See, not to Dublin anyhow.
Well, I wish you would walk out.
You're not taking on.
Now,
Yes, 71.12%.
The people of Ireland, North and South, ratified the outcome of the Good Friday Agreement in a referendum just over a month later. Ian Paisley was once more on the outside.
At that moment in time, how did you feel as an outsider? Did you feel disturbed?
No.
Isolated? Alone?
No, because the official unionists were divided on the issue, very much divided.
What was wrong with that deal? Why did you not accept such a deal?
Because you don't sign a deal that's going to, in the end, destroy you.
Of the Good Friday Agreement, you said it was the greatest betrayal ever foisted by a unionist leader on the unionist people.
That's right.
Is that how you saw it?
So it was. It was a selling out of all that we stood for and all that our fathers died for. And the people I was speaking for were the people who gave their lives in 2 world wars to keep us in a place of freedom. And this thing goes into the very core of the Ulster man and the Ulster Unionist, and I don't think it's understood. Ulster Unionists can fight things among themselves and be very cruel in themselves, but there is a place where we all join together and where blood is mixed with blood and bones are mixed with bones. We say, so far, but no farther.
So what was it all about?
Getting rid of Ian Paisley.
In whose interest?
In the interest of the people who took over.
They did a dirty trick on him, dirty deeds on him, and in the end he was really left with no option but to stand down.
We're talking about blood on blood now, Mr. Paisley. How hurtful were those remarks?
They were absolutely disgraceful, and they were disgraceful because the man that they put in my position couldn't keep his own seat.
They assassinated him by their words and by their deeds. I think they treated him shamefully.
Those people had only one thing to serve, and that was their own ego.
And you can see that next Monday night at the same time here on BBC One Northern Ireland, 10:35.